You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin. The sound of pots and pans clattering in the kitchen was a foreign comfort, an unexpected presence that seemed both new and yet familiar, like the gentle creaking of the floorboards in the hallway. I sat at the weathered oak table, watching the light shift as the afternoon sun slipped through the old glass windows, dust motes swirling lazily in its path. The house felt fuller with Helen's movements, her footsteps light, the sound of her humming under her breath, the soft click of the oven door. It had been nearly 2 months since she and Toby arrived, their bags heavy with grief, and yet it was still difficult for me to adjust to their presence. The house, once Miriam's and mine, now felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who had a different rhythm, a different way of being. "Dinner's almost ready, Dad," Helen called from the kitchen, her voice sharp but kind. I had to stop myself from cringing. She never called me anything other than Dad. The first week after Liam's funeral had been a haze. I couldn't focus on anything, too lost in memories of Miriam and the life we'd built here. But Helen, it seemed, knew what needed to be done. She was a whirlwind of action, setting things in motion with a quiet determination that reminded me of Miriam's earlier years, when she had orchestrated every aspect of our life with careful hands. I had noticed, though, that it was Helen's presence that was slowly replacing Miriam's. She took over the chores with an almost clinical efficiency, washing dishes after every meal, straightening up, without waiting for the clutter to accumulate. She started cooking dinners, though nothing she made felt quite as comforting as Miriam's chicken stew or the homemade bread she used to bake on Sundays. Still, there was warmth in it, the smell of garlic and rosemary in the oven. It was a new kind of warmth. I could see how much Toby appreciated her routine. The boy was still adjusting, still distant at times. But I watched as he began to slowly come out of his shell around her, responding to her gentle nudges. She'd help him with his homework after dinner, and I'd listen to them talk, their voices muffled from the other room. I heard Toby laugh at something she said, a soft, light sound I hadn't heard in weeks. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had that kind of connection with him. Our years apart, those long stretches of time where my work kept me away from home, had built a wall between us, and I knew I'd need to climb over it if I was ever going to be the grandfather I wanted to be. The beginning of this new chapter, with Helen and Toby here, felt like a second chance, a quiet moment to build something together. That was the good part, the part I had learned to appreciate. But there were moments, small, subtle ones, where my old life, the life with Miriam, felt too close for comfort. There were the changes Helen made, not big ones at first, just the little things. The first time it happened, I noticed the bench in the living room had been moved. It had been Miriam's favorite spot to read, tucked in the corner near the window, where she could catch the last of the sun's rays. The bench was worn, the cushion sagging from years of use, but it was her place, and I had never even thought about replacing it. But now, it was gone. "Where's the bench?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Helen turned from the stove, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I moved it out. It was taking up too much space in here. I put it in the attic. You won't miss it." I didn't respond right away, unsure of how to put into words what was bubbling in my chest. The bench wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a part of her. Miriam had sat there, with the soft murmur of the ocean as a backdrop, reading her books, watching the world move outside. But to Helen, it was just another item to be shuffled around to make things more manageable. "I didn't realize it was in the way," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It just meant something, that's all." Helen's face softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't think. I can bring it back if you want." I shook my head, not wanting to make her feel bad. It was just a bench after all. "It's fine," I said. But that night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind turning. The room felt different. The house felt different. And that simple change, moving the bench, had somehow shifted everything. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. I hadn't realized how deeply rooted Miriam's presence still was in this house. I turned over, trying to find sleep, but sleep didn't come, not with the unease gnawing at me. The next few days felt like a slow unraveling. Helen took it upon herself to clean out cupboards and closets, rearranging the kitchen, moving things from room to room. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. The old wooden recipe box Miriam kept on the counter was now tucked behind the spice rack, out of sight. And the vase Miriam had put on the mantel. It had been replaced with a newer one that didn't hold the same weight, the same history. I could feel my frustration building, but I bit my tongue. This wasn't Helen's fault. She was trying to make a home for herself and Toby, trying to get back on her feet after Liam's death. But it didn't stop the quiet ache in my chest, the feeling that every change, every little shift, was pushing Miriam's memory further away. That night, after a particularly tense dinner, I sat down with Toby. He was fidgeting with a model ship on the coffee table, the kind I used to make when I was a younger man, back when the sea was still my world. He'd never shown much interest in the ships before, but now he was studying them with quiet focus. "You like those?" I asked, hoping to break the silence. He looked up, surprised I was speaking to him. "Yeah, they're cool. They remind me of the ocean." "The ocean's where all the stories come from," I said, a little wistful. "Every ship has its tale, its own journey." Toby nodded, his fingers tracing the edges of a small wooden sailboat. "I think I'd like to sail someday," he said softly. "Maybe I'll teach you how to make one of these ships," I offered, trying to keep the conversation light. "There's a lot to learn, but it's worth it." For the first time in days, I saw a flicker of a smile cross Toby's face. "Okay, Grandpa. I think that'd be cool." It wasn't much, but it was a start, a small shift in the silence that had settled between us. It was enough to keep me going for now, but later, as I lay in bed again, the weight of the house, the weight of these changes, hung heavy on me. I wondered how long it would take for me to get used to it, this new life, this new rhythm, how long it would take for me to stop missing the old one. And I wondered if I'd ever find peace again in the home I had built with Miriam. I had always been a man of routine. Even after Miriam passed, I clung to the patterns of our life. The way she'd leave the laundry in the basket for me to fold. The way the ocean's rhythm dictated the pace of my days. But now, with Helen and Toby here, I felt like I was losing even that small sense of control. The first sign that things were shifting in ways I wasn't comfortable with came when I walked into the living room one afternoon, after returning from a short walk on the beach, and saw Helen standing near the walls with a can of paint in her hand. "Hey, what's going on here?" I asked, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. Helen stepped back, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "Just freshening up the place a little, Nathan. This wall's been the same shade of yellow for years, and I thought it might be nice to lighten it up. You don't mind, do you?" I hesitated, my eyes tracing the soft, sun-faded yellow that Miriam had chosen. It wasn't just a wall color, it was part of the life we'd built together. Miriam had always loved warm tones, said they reminded her of summer sunsets. Now, as Helen stood there, a roller in one hand, the same color starting to smudge beneath the white paint, I felt that same creeping sense of loss from before. It was subtle, but it hit hard. I cleared my throat. "Well, Miriam chose that color for the walls. I've never felt the need to change it." Helen glanced at me, her expression soft but unyielding. I know. But you said yourself, Nathan, that things need to change, that you're ready for something new." I thought this might be a good start." I bit my lip, the words lingering in my throat, but I didn't say them. I didn't know how to explain it, how to tell her that this house wasn't just a place. It was a vessel for memories, for the past. There was so little of Miriam left here, I didn't want to lose the little that remained. Maybe just leave the kitchen, I said, gesturing toward the space Miriam had loved so much, with its yellow walls and polished wood counters. "It's the heart of the house." Helen nodded, but I noticed she didn't seem all that convinced. It was a fleeting moment, but it stuck with me. As she worked, I quietly retreated to my study, unsure of how to reconcile the changes that were taking place under my roof. The next shift came a week later, when Helen decided to clear out the closet in the hallway, where Miriam's coats had hung for years, a silent testament to her presence. I had saved them all, carefully hanging each one, pressing them with the same care Miriam had always shown when she folded her sweaters. I never wore them, I didn't need to, but seeing them there, her coats, the same ones she'd worn when we walked along the beach or when she ran errands in town, brought a kind of comfort, a quiet, lasting connection to her. That morning, I opened the front closet to grab my jacket and it hit me. The space was empty. The coats were gone. Just a few old raincoats remained, piled in the corner. I stood there for a moment, the weight of the absence making it hard to breathe. Helen was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. Toby was on the porch, talking about the model ship we'd started working on together. No one had said a word. It was as if the coats were simply no longer needed. I swallowed hard, the hurt creeping in before I could stop it. Finally, I called out to Helen. "Helen, where are Miriam's coats? I had them in the front closet." She appeared in the doorway, her face neutral. "I thought they were taking up too much room. I packed them away for donation. I'm sorry, Nathan, but you can't keep everything." I stared at her, the knot in my stomach tightening. Those were Miriam's. They were important. Helen's shoulders relaxed, and she set the knife down on the counter. "I know, I get it. But you can't live in the past, Nathan. We have to move forward." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I nodded stiffly, too angry to respond, but too tired to argue. Later that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the silence pressing in from all sides. The house, which had once felt like a living memory, now felt like an empty shell. Helen was doing what she thought was best, creating a home for herself and Toby, and I didn't want to stand in the way. But the line between the past and the present was starting to blur, and I wasn't sure I knew where I fit in this new version of my own home. It was after midnight before I finally lay down to sleep, but sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling, restless, my mind racing. Every change felt like a quiet erosion of what Miriam and I had built together. It wasn't about the coats, it wasn't about the paint. It was about the space I had lost, the place I had once held in this house, and the creeping sense that I was no longer welcome here in the way I used to be. The house felt different now, not because of Helen's efforts to make it her own, but because it was becoming clear that I was losing something that no one had warned me about, my own authority, my own place in this home. I turned onto my side, clutching the pillow as though it could anchor me back to the past, to Miriam's memory, to the way things used to be. But the house was changing, and I had to face the fact that, in some ways, I was too. That night, as I drifted in and out of fitful sleep, I thought about my bedroom, the one room that Miriam had never let anyone touch. It was the last untouched space in the house, the only place where her presence lingered like the faint scent of the perfume she used to wear. I knew it wouldn't be long before Helen started making changes there too, and when she did, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stand it. But for now, I held on to it, holding on to the last pieces of the life Miriam and I had shared. The first morning I woke up to find the contractors in the living room, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. The sound of drills and hammering filled the air, echoing through the house. My heart raced in my chest as I stumbled out of bed, still groggy from a restless night. The last few weeks had been a blur of small betrayals, like tiny waves chipping away at the foundation of something sacred. And this, the sight of men I didn't know, setting up in my home, in the room where Miriam and I had spent our quiet evenings together, felt like the final blow. I stood in the hallway, staring at the men who were already drilling into the wall. I didn't even recognize the new shelving unit they were setting up, let alone the massive flat-screen TV that seemed to be taking shape in the corner of the room. I walked toward them, my legs stiff, my mind trying to grasp the situation. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice rough with confusion. One of the workers, a man in his 30s, looked up from the drill and smiled. "Good morning, sir. We're just setting up the new entertainment system, like Mrs. Tyler asked." "Mrs. Tyler," I repeated, my heart thumping. "Helen." "Yes, sir. She said you agreed to it." I shook my head, a knot forming in my stomach. "No, I didn't agree to anything." The worker faltered, glancing around nervously. I could see the discomfort in his face, but he wasn't the one I needed to speak to. I turned and walked to the kitchen where Helen was, preparing breakfast as if nothing was out of the ordinary. She didn't look up as I entered, humming to herself as she flipped a pancake. The smell of syrup and butter filled the room. So domestic, so normal, it made the anger in my chest burn even hotter. I had been patient, too patient for too long. The house, the home Miriam and I had built, was slipping through my fingers like sand, and I wasn't sure how much more I could lose without saying something. "Helen," I said, my voice low but firm. "What's going on? Why are there contractors in the living room?" She didn't flinch, didn't even stop cooking. "It's for Toby. I've been meaning to do it for a while now. The house needs to feel more like a family home for him, Nathan. It needs to be more than just memories. We need a place where he can feel comfortable." "Comfortable," I repeated, my chest tight. "This is still my home, Helen. It's where I've lived for decades, Miriam's and my home, and You've been living in the past," she interrupted, her tone more brisk now, more detached. "You told me yourself that you were ready for change. We're just making it happen." I felt the words hit me like a slap, but I couldn't show it. Making it happen, I scoffed. This is my home, Helen. I don't. You can't keep holding on to the past like this, she snapped, finally turning to face me. This house, your life, it's all about memories. But you can't live in a memory forever. We're trying to make this place work for all of us, for me, for Toby. I stood there, stunned, trying to gather my thoughts. My mind kept flashing back to the way Miriam had decorated this room, how she had arranged the furniture, how she had chosen every little detail with such care. And now, it felt like all of that was being erased in one fell swoop. Every memory, every piece of her that had been left behind, was being replaced. You're doing this without even asking me, I said, my voice growing louder. You're making changes to my home without my permission. The walls, the furniture, the coats Miriam left behind. Everything is just disappearing. Helen's face softened slightly, but there was no apology in her eyes, only an air of exasperation. Nathan, I'm not trying to erase Miriam. I'm not trying to disrespect her memory, but this place isn't just hers anymore. It's ours. And if I'm going to be here with Toby, I need space to breathe. I need a place that feels like it's mine, too. I stepped back, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't just the house she was claiming. It was my authority here, my right to dictate how things were done. And I had been so passive for so long, so willing to let her make decisions, to give up control because I didn't want to upset her or make things harder for Toby. But now, I felt like I was losing myself. I understand you're trying to make it work, I said more quietly now, my frustration spilling into something more vulnerable. But this house, Helen, it's all I have left of her, of Miriam. You can't just come in here and start tearing it apart. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of regret. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the determined set of her jaw. I'm not tearing it apart. I'm just making it livable. Just like you said you wanted. You need to move on, Nathan. You need to let go of the past. The words stung, and I realized, standing there in the kitchen, that I had never felt more alone. I wasn't ready to let go of the past. I couldn't just forget the life Miriam and I had shared in this house, the house we built with our hands. But I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on to something that felt like it was slipping away. That night, after dinner, I sat in my bedroom, the one room that Helen hadn't touched yet, the last place where Miriam's presence lingered. But even now, I felt the pull of change, the silent weight of everything I'd lost and was about to lose. I stared out the window at the moonlit sea, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. But it didn't bring the peace it once did. I had been patient for so long. But now, with Helen and Toby here, I was realizing that patience was no longer enough. I had to fight for what was mine, this house, this life, this memory. If I didn't, I feared I would lose it all. And soon, I would have nothing left. Tomorrow, I would have to put my foot down. The question was, could I stand my ground without losing everything? The air was salty with the promise of spring as I walked down the dock, the weathered planks beneath my boots creaking with each step. The sea stretched out before me, vast and empty, the horizon barely visible through the mist. I hadn't been out here in a while, not since Miriam was alive, not since we used to sit side by side, looking out at the water, discussing plans for our next project, or simply soaking in the peace. I met Miles at the usual diner near the pier, the one with the cracked red booths and greasy windows. The place hadn't changed in years, and for some reason, that brought me a small measure of comfort. Miles was already sitting at our booth when I arrived, his thick white beard making him look like he'd just stepped out of a sea captain's storybook. His eyes, however, were sharp, always assessing, always thoughtful. He raised his coffee mug as I slid into the seat across from him. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," Miles said, his voice gravelly with age but still strong. He didn't wait for a response before he added, "It's not healthy, Nathan. Not after all that's happened." I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to shake the feeling of being trapped. You know what it's like. Things haven't been easy since Liam passed. Helen and Toby are here now, and it feels like, I don't know, like I'm being pushed out of my own life. Miles leaned back, his gaze narrowing. "How long have you been living with this storm brewing in your chest?" "Too long," I admitted. "But I don't know how to fix it. I can't go on living like this, stuck in a house that doesn't feel like mine anymore." Maybe it's time to make a change then. Miles said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You've been holding on to that house, to your memories. But at what cost? I stared down at my coffee cup, the black liquid swirling with my unease. His words stuck to me like barnacles on the hull of a ship. He was right. I hadn't allowed myself to move forward, not really. I had been so caught up in the past, holding on to the house, holding on to the way things used to be, that I didn't realize how much it had changed. You think it's time to let it go? I asked, a lump in my throat. It wasn't an easy thing to say out loud. Miles looked at me over the rim of his cup, his eyes knowing. You've got a neighbor who's been eager to buy for a while. He's a good man, and I reckon he'll take good care of the place. You've been thinking about selling for a while now. Maybe it's time you actually do it. The words hit me like a wave. I'd thought about it before, of course, but the thought of leaving behind the house Miriam and I had rebuilt with our own hands, brick by brick, the house where we had spent our best and worst days. It felt like I was betraying her memory. I don't know, I murmured. It's not that simple. I'm not saying it's easy, Miles replied, his voice softening. But Nathan, how much of Miriam's spirit is really left in that house? You've kept it together for a long time, but you can't hold on to something that's already slipped through your fingers. It's time for you to start living again. I stared out the window, the fog rolling in over the water. It felt like the past few months had been nothing but fog, thick, suffocating, preventing me from seeing anything clearly. I needed to make a choice, and I could feel, deep in my bones, that Miles was right. This house, this home, wasn't really mine anymore, not the way it used to be. I sighed, the weight of it all pressing down on me. You're right, I said quietly, the words feeling strange but true. I've been holding on to the past, thinking I could preserve it. But it's gone. Miriam's gone, and the house. It doesn't feel like a home anymore, not with Helen and Toby here, not with all the changes. Maybe it's time to let it go. Miles smiled, a slow, knowing grin. It's never easy, Nathan. But sometimes, the best way forward is to let go of the past. I nodded, finally feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace, a glimpse of something new on the horizon. Later that evening, I walked back to the house, my mind swirling with possibilities. I had made up my mind. I was going to sell the house. It wasn't the easy choice, and it wasn't the one I had hoped I would make. But it was the one that made sense, the one that would finally free me from this endless cycle of grief. The house had been built with love and care, but love had its seasons. Miriam had always said that. The seasons changed, and so did life. I was ready to let go of the house, and everything that had come with it, so I could finally start living again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I could see a future that didn't involve clinging to the past. I could see a future where I could reclaim my peace. Tomorrow, I would call the buyer, but tonight, I sat in the rocking chair Miriam had once loved, the gentle sway of the wood beneath me grounding me to the present. I was finally ready to move forward. The decision to sell the house had been made. Quietly, without fanfare or discussion, I had contacted the interested buyer, a local woman whose daughter was returning to the coast to raise her family. She was eager to move into the house, and with the help of an old real estate agent I trusted, we worked out the details quickly. It was a swift private transaction, exactly the kind of deal I needed. It wasn't easy, not by any stretch, but it was the only way I could see forward, a way to start anew, to reclaim a sense of independence that had long been eroded by years of grief and compromise. The papers were signed, the money was transferred, and the deal was sealed. Still, I hadn't told Helen or Toby, not yet. They didn't need to know until everything was finalized. That night, after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table. The scent of Helen's casserole still hung in the air, though the meal had long since been eaten. Toby was in the other room, playing a game on his phone, and Helen was cleaning up, her movements brisk and purposeful. I cleared my throat, breaking the comfortable silence. "Helen," I began, my voice steady. "There's something we need to talk about." She paused mid-scrub, her gaze flicking to me over her shoulder. "What is it?" I felt a strange calm settle over me as I spoke. "I've sold the house. The papers are signed. It's done." Her face froze, her hands halting their work, and she turned slowly to face me. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I could feel the weight of her silence, the tension hanging thick in the room like the heavy mist outside. "You... what?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "I've sold it," I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "The buyer's a woman from the neighborhood. She's been interested for a while. I didn't see any reason to drag it out." Helen's expression twisted, her lips tightening into a thin line. "But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you discuss this with me first?" "Because it was my decision to make," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "This is still my home, Helen. It's been mine for decades, and now it's time for me to move on." She took a step toward me, her eyes narrowing, and for a moment I thought she might shout or even cry. Instead, her voice remained cold. "You didn't even think to consult me, to consider what I might need. What Toby might need. This is our home now, Nathan. We've been living here for 2 months. You didn't even give us a chance to settle in before you ripped the rug out from under us." I stood up, my chair scraping across the floor as I felt my patience thinning. "You've been here for 2 months, Helen. But this house, this place, has been mine long before you arrived. I'm not ripping the rug out from under you. I'm doing what's best for me. I've given enough of myself to this house and to the memories of Miriam. It's time to move on." The room fell silent again, and I saw the conflict in her eyes, the hurt, the anger, the betrayal. I knew I'd shocked her, but there was no turning back now. "I'm giving you 30 days, I continued, my voice firm but controlled. "You and Toby have 30 days to pack up and leave. The deal's done, and I've already arranged for the movers." Helen opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, silencing her. "I've made up my mind. I don't want this house anymore, and I don't want to stay here, pretending that everything's still the same. It's time for all of us to move on." For a long moment, Helen just stared at me, her hands trembling at her sides. Then, with a sharp exhale, she turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps fading as she retreated to her room. I stood there, the weight of the words I'd just spoken settling heavily on my chest. I had done it. I had finally made the decision that would change everything, that would free me from the house that had bound me to the past. But as I stood in the silence of the kitchen, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was going to break. I had no idea how Helen would react, how this would affect my relationship with Toby. But I knew this. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my grief, shackled to a house that no longer felt like home. The following days were tense. Helen didn't say much to me, and Toby, though he spent time with me, seemed distant, his usual spark dimmed by the heaviness in the air. I tried to explain myself to Helen, tried to make her see that I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it for me, for my future, so that I could finally find some peace. But she didn't understand, not at first. And I could see the way her frustration festered beneath the surface, a storm waiting to break. I had made my decision. I knew what I needed to do for myself. But as I walked through the house, now stripped of its familiar comfort, I realized just how much I had lost. The house was a symbol of my life with Miriam, and now it was gone. The rooms, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt empty, hollow. And I wasn't sure how long it would take for me to find my way again. Helen had her own ideas, her own plans for the future. But in that moment, I realized that I had to reclaim mine, even if it meant making hard decisions and facing the consequences alone. I had to move forward, even if it meant leaving behind everything that had once been my world. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper filled the small office, louder than it should have been, making me aware of how quiet everything else had become. I was sitting across from Mr. Calder, my financial advisor, the man who'd been handling my money for years. He was going over the details of the trust I'd just established for Toby, outlining every clause and condition. I had made the decision quickly, but now, sitting here with the paperwork, it felt final, like the last step before moving on. There was no going back. This money, the life savings I had accumulated over the years, would be set aside for Toby's future, and he wouldn't have access to it until he was old enough to truly appreciate what it meant, what it stood for. "That's it then," Mr. Calder said, tapping the last paper with a satisfied nod. "Toby's future is secured. No one will be able to touch it until he's of age." I stared at the papers, the weight of the decision settling deeper inside me. I had done this to protect Toby, to make sure he had a life beyond the chaos that had become his. The last few months had been a whirlwind, and I couldn't imagine him being caught up in the financial mess of it all. At least this This trust would provide him with something stable, something real. "Thank you, Mr. Calder," I said, forcing a smile. "You've made everything much clearer." He nodded. "It's my pleasure, Nathan. I'll make sure everything is set up for Toby's future, just like you asked." After the meeting, I stepped out into the late afternoon light, the air still cool against my skin. My feet carried me toward the small rental I'd moved into. The house I once shared with Miriam now seemed like a distant memory, a place I no longer recognized. The transition wasn't easy. It never was. But I was slowly finding my footing again. The small apartment was nothing like the coastal home I'd built with Miriam, but it was mine, and that felt like a small victory, a space where I could finally breathe again. When I returned home, I found a text from Helen waiting for me. "Helen, we need to talk about housing. This isn't fair. I can't afford to stay in this apartment with Toby. I've been looking for a place, but it's hard to find something decent." I let out a long breath. The requests from Helen were becoming more frequent, more pressing. It wasn't just about the house anymore. She was reaching out, trying to secure her place in this new arrangement, trying to find stability for herself and Toby. I understood it, but I also knew my boundaries were being tested. I sat down at my small kitchen table, typing out a response carefully. "Nathan, Helen, I can help. I'm offering $10,000 to help you with a deposit or any other housing expenses. But I need you to understand something. You've got to honor the visitation rights I've set for Toby. I'll be in his life, regardless of the situation." I waited for a response, my heart pounding in my chest. There were so many things left unsaid between us, resentments, grief, and all the cracks that had formed over the past months. But I had to be firm, for my own peace of mind, for Toby's future. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed. "Helen, fine, I'll take the money, but we'll have to figure this out when Toby and I find a place." I stared at the screen for a long moment. There was a finality to her words, but I couldn't deny the sense of relief that washed over me. This wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the beginning of something new, something that put my needs, my peace first. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a routine. I moved into my modest rental, spending my days fishing when I could, working on the few small repairs that kept my hands busy, and watching the seasons shift as the light changed over the ocean. But the silence of the house echoed in my ears. The house that was no longer mine. The house I had worked so hard to build with Miriam. I missed it, yes, but I also knew I couldn't return to it. Not with the way things had shifted, not with Helen and Toby living there. I kept in touch with Toby, despite the distance. He would text me after school, asking when we could go fishing again, or telling me about his day. I'd gotten used to his quiet, tentative messages. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that, despite everything, our bond was still there. And that was something I wasn't going to lose. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there stood Toby, a slight grin on his face, his eyes bright with excitement. "Grandpa," he said, his voice almost shy, "can we go fishing tomorrow? I really want to learn how to tie the knots like you do." I felt a lump in my throat. It had been a while since he'd asked me for something like this, something just for the two of us, something that felt like old times. "Of course, Toby," I said, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in a long time. "We'll go first thing in the morning. I'll teach you everything I know." He nodded enthusiastically, then hesitated, his hand clutching the doorframe. "Grandpa, I've been thinking." I raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was going. "I want to live with you," he said, his voice small but firm. "I don't want to be with Mom anymore. She's always stressed, and I miss being here with you. I miss how things used to be." I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. I knew this wouldn't be an easy conversation, but it was a conversation that had to happen. Toby wasn't just a child anymore. He was becoming aware of the cracks in his world, and he was reaching out for something solid, something he knew he could trust. "I don't know, Toby," I said, my voice soft but serious. "We'll have to talk about it with your mom. She needs to understand how important this is to both of us." Toby nodded, his face serious but hopeful. "I just want to be with you, Grandpa. I think I'd be happy there." I ruffled his hair, the weight of his words pressing down on me. This was the first time he had said something like this, and I knew it wasn't a decision he'd made lightly. "We'll talk to your mom," I said gently. "We'll figure it out." As I watched him walk back toward the car, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The pieces of my life were slowly falling into place again, piece by piece, even though I had no idea what the future would look like. But one thing was clear. I wasn't giving up on Toby, not now, not ever. The new chapter of my life was unfolding, and this time, I wasn't going to let go of what mattered most. The weeks after the house sale were an uneasy quiet. I thought things might settle, that Helen would find a place to live, and life could get back to some semblance of normal. But instead, the storm I'd been trying to outrun found its way to me, dressed in legal jargon and court filings. It all started with a letter, one that came in a thick envelope, its contents crisp and official. When I tore it open and saw the words lawsuit and misuse of family assets, my stomach twisted. It felt like a punch to the gut, the kind that you don't see coming, but that knocks the wind out of you all the same. Helen was suing me, claiming I'd mishandled family property and used the money from the house sale inappropriately. She wanted the sale overturned, and she wanted the trust I'd set up for Toby to be dismantled so she could control it. The accusation hit like a shipwreck, hard and unforgiving. I sat there for hours, reading the same paragraphs over and over, unable to believe what I was seeing. I had done everything to protect Toby, to ensure his future was safe, and now Helen was trying to take that from me. She was trying to erase the one thing that had given me some peace, my ability to protect my grandson. It was clear she had no intention of letting things end quietly. But I wasn't going to back down this time. I had learned the hard way that there was only so much you could give before it became a one-way street. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to fight back. I called my old friend Sam Davies, a maritime lawyer I'd known since my days working on the docks. Sam was sharp, ruthless in the best way, and if there was anyone who could handle this, it was him. We met at the diner on the corner, where the familiar clink of coffee cups and the hum of low conversation provided the backdrop to a conversation that felt like the beginning of a new battle. "I read through the paperwork," Sam said, his voice steady. "And I'll tell you right now, Helen doesn't have much of a leg to stand on. The sale was yours to make, and you've done everything by the book. Her claim is flimsy at best." I nodded, the weight of the situation starting to sink in. "I just don't get it. I was trying to do the right thing, secure Toby's future, give him something stable, and now this." Sam leaned back in his seat, his hands clasped in front of him. People don't like it when they feel like they've lost control. Helen's angry, Nathan. She's lost the house, lost the life she thought she was building here, and now she's fighting for whatever she can grab. I thought about Toby, about how he had been so torn between his loyalty to me and his mother, how the rift between Helen and me had been growing ever since Liam's death. I didn't want to drag Toby into this any more than I had to, but this wasn't just about the house. It was about securing his future, about making sure he had something to hold on to. "I'm not backing down, Sam," I said, my voice firm. "I'll fight this until it's over." Sam's eyes softened. "I know you will, and we'll win, but you need to brace yourself. This won't be easy, and it's going to get messier before it gets better." The legal proceedings began almost immediately. Helen's attorney sent wave after wave of paperwork, challenging every aspect of the sale, every detail of the trust. At first, it felt like a never-ending barrage. But Sam was relentless, always 2 steps ahead, cutting through the noise with precision and logic. Meanwhile, Helen's side of things wasn't exactly going smoothly. She had moved into a small apartment with Toby, but I could see the strain on her face whenever we spoke. She was struggling to make ends meet, and I knew she wasn't the only one. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for what had happened, but it wasn't my fault that her world had crumbled. It was her actions, her choices, that had led us here. I kept in touch with Toby, though it was harder now. His texts came less frequently, and when they did arrive, they were short and filled with the kind of guarded language that made me feel like an outsider. I knew he was torn, stuck in the middle of a war he didn't ask for, and I wanted nothing more than to pull him out of it. One night, after a particularly long day of court filings and meetings, I received a text from Toby. It was brief, but it hit me hard. "Toby, I miss you, Grandpa. I just don't know what's happening anymore." I stared at the message, my heart breaking for him. I wanted to tell him everything would be okay, that we'd get through this, but I couldn't lie to him. The truth was, I didn't know how it was all going to end. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let Helen take Toby away from me. The court date arrived faster than I expected. Sam and I walked into the courtroom, the air thick with tension. Helen was there, of course, her expression tight, her lawyer by her side. Toby wasn't with her, and my heart twisted with the absence of his bright, familiar face. The judge listened to both sides, but Sam was a master at keeping things clear and simple. He presented the facts, how I had handled the sale of the house, how the trust had been set up with Toby's future in mind, and how there was no legal ground for Helen's claim. Every argument Helen's lawyer put forward was shot down with ease. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor, dismissing Helen's lawsuit and upholding the validity of the sale and the trust. I felt the relief wash over me, but it wasn't the victory I had hoped for. Helen's face was pale with anger, and I could see the sharp edge of resentment in her eyes. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. As I left the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and emptiness. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Back at my apartment, I sat in the quiet, staring at the small room around me. It was mine, but it didn't feel like home, not in the way the house by the sea had. I knew this wasn't the end. There would be more struggles ahead, more hurdles to jump over. But I also knew one thing for sure. I would fight for Toby, no matter what it took, even if it meant facing Helen's wrath every step of the way. It was a gray Saturday afternoon when I received the call from Martha. I hadn't heard from her in over a year, not since she had moved to the West Coast. But there she was, her voice carrying that same steady cadence, as if no time had passed at all. "Nathan, I'm coming back to the coast," she said, a quiet excitement in her tone. "I've got some business to take care of, and I was hoping you'd meet me for a coffee when I get in." It's been too long. Martha had been a friend of mine from the shipyard, a fellow shipwright, and, like me, a woman who had spent most of her life on the water. We had always gotten along well, her dry sense of humor and no-nonsense attitude meshing perfectly with my own. She was also widowed, a loss that had shaped her as much as my own grief had shaped me. I had never considered the idea of someone like her coming back into my life, but something about her voice, the sense of familiarity, made me realize that it was just what I needed. I met her a few days later at the same diner where I had met Miles all those months ago, the sea breeze ruffling through the half-open door. Martha's hair was streaked with silver, and the lines around her eyes had deepened with time, but she still carried the same air of confidence. She was just as I remembered, steady, grounded, and a bit unshakable. "I'm back for good," she said as we sat down across from each other. She folded her hands on the table, her gaze steady. "I've had enough of the city. Enough of the rush. I want to be near the water again. I was thinking about buying a small place, but I realized it doesn't need to be alone." I blinked, my mind catching up. "What do you mean by that?" She gave me a crooked smile. "I was hoping we could co-purchase a house. You and me, we've both been through a lot, Nathan. We're both in need of a fresh start, and I can't think of anyone else I'd rather share a home with. No strings, no complications. Just two old friends keeping each other company. If you're interested, of course." Her offer hit me like a wave crashing against the rocks. The thought of sharing a space, of not being alone in a home anymore, appealed to me more than I cared to admit. The house, the old life, the memories of Miriam, they had been too much for me to hold on to. And now, here was an opportunity to rebuild, without the weight of the past hanging over me. I sat back in my chair, considering her words. I had been living in a modest rental for months, trying to make sense of my life in the aftermath of everything that had happened. The house I had fought so hard to keep had already slipped through my fingers, and yet, here was a chance to create something new, something that wasn't tied to loss but to possibility. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. "I think it's exactly what I need." Her face softened, and she nodded. "Good. We'll make it work. But there's no pressure, Nathan. We'll keep our space, but we'll share a roof." Over the next few weeks, we scoured listings, looking for something close to the water, but small enough for the two of us. Eventually, we found a place, a modest cottage that had seen better days but had a good structure and room to grow. It was perfect for both of us. Enough space for me to keep my tools, a small garden for Martha, and a room for Toby when he visited. As soon as we signed the papers, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It was a fresh start, not just for me, but for Toby too. I had no idea how Helen would take this. She had never been entirely supportive of my connections to the past, particularly when it came to relationships like the one I had with Martha. But I was determined to make this work for Toby. If this was what I needed to move forward, then it was what I would do. Toby had been spending more time with me lately, especially on weekends when Helen was away. He was growing, and I could see the signs of maturity in him, the subtle shifts in his attitude. He still missed his father, still carried the weight of the tragedy, but I could see his hesitation softening, his laughter more frequent, his trust in me building. One Saturday, as we walked along the beach, Toby stopped and looked out at the horizon, the golden light casting long shadows behind us. He turned to me, his expression serious, and it hit me. This wasn't just about spending time together anymore. "Grandpa," he said, his voice hesitant but firm, "I want to live with you full time. I don't want to live with Mom anymore. It's just not the same." I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. This wasn't a request I had expected, not this soon, not with everything that had happened. But I saw it in his eyes, the same fear I had once felt, the desire to feel safe again, to find a place where things made sense. "Are you sure about that, Toby?" I asked, kneeling down to meet him at eye level. "It's not going to be easy. You'd be with me, but we'd have to figure things out with your mom." He nodded, his eyes steady. "I'm sure, Grandpa. I miss how things used to be when you and Dad were here. I want to be with you." I stood up, the weight of his words pressing down on me. This was a decision I couldn't take lightly, but I knew one thing. I would never push Toby away. If he wanted to be with me, I'd make it happen. "I'll talk to your mom," I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out together, okay?" Toby's face lit up with a quiet relief, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the verge of something good. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about rebuilding a family, a place where we could all heal together. A few days later, I met with Helen to talk about Toby's request. I had no illusions that this would be easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do. She listened, her face unreadable, as I explained Toby's wishes. The conversation was tense, but we managed to reach an agreement. She didn't want to lose Toby, but she understood that he needed stability, and I had proven I could offer that. In the end, we agreed to a shared custody arrangement. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for Toby, that was all that mattered. As I looked out over the small cottage we had just begun to call home, I realized that life, despite its many challenges, was finally beginning to settle into a new rhythm. There was still much to rebuild, both physically and emotionally, but I had a sense of purpose again. Martha, with her quiet strength and steady hands, would help me find peace in the everyday tasks of life. Toby, always full of energy and curiosity, would fill the house with laughter and joy. And Helen, while still distant, had given us a path forward, a way to build something new while honoring the past. It wasn't perfect, and it never would. This was different, a fresh start, something made with intention rather than legacy. The walls were simple, the floors worn, but there was a quiet peace in it that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Martha had already settled in, planting flowers in the small garden out back and setting up the modest kitchen with her usual efficiency. I'd been too busy getting settled myself, taking in the view of the water from the porch and working on a few small projects here and there. But as I stood in the living room now, watching Toby and Martha chat as she worked on the garden, I realized something profound. I was finally building a home again. There were no overwhelming reminders of the past, no walls filled with Miriam's paintings, or the echoes of the old life, just new memories waiting to be created. Toby had his own room, decorated with a few of his old things, and for the first time in a long time, I could see a sense of stability in his eyes. He was more comfortable here, more at ease. As I watched them, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace, real, quiet peace. The kind that comes not from trying to hold on to the past, but from letting go and making something new. Something that wasn't just about surviving, but living. "Grandpa, can I help?" Toby's voice interrupted my thoughts as he ran into the living room, a small trowel in his hand, his face flushed with excitement. "Martha said I could help plant some of the herbs. I can do it by myself, I think." I smiled, watching his enthusiasm, and nodded. "Of course you can, Toby. We'll go out together once you're ready." He beamed, running off to grab his gardening gloves. I stood for a moment, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall, and felt my heart swell. The old wounds, the painful loss of Miriam, still lingered, but they no longer defined the space I occupied. The house, the life I was building now, had nothing to do with the past. The next few months passed in a quiet, steady rhythm. Martha and I shared the house, each of us maintaining our own space, but also coming together when the day wound down. She spent her days working on her marine engineering projects, and I focused on small repairs around the house, like the fence out back and the shelves in the living room. We didn't need grand gestures or complicated plans. What we had was enough. We respected each other's space and time, and in the evenings we would talk over a cup of tea or share a meal. The house was small, but it was cozy. We didn't need more. What mattered was that it felt right, that it was ours in a way that didn't diminish the past, but simply allowed us to move forward. Toby continued to visit, spending more time with me, especially on weekends when Helen was away. At first, I thought it was just a temporary escape for him, a brief respite from the tension at his mother's apartment. But over time, it became clear that he was beginning to see this place as home. It wasn't just a place to visit. It was a sanctuary. One Saturday morning, after a fishing trip I'd promised him, Toby pulled me aside. He was quiet, his eyes more serious than I'd ever seen them. "Grandpa, I've been thinking. I want to stay here, full time. I don't want to go back to Mom's apartment anymore." His words hit me like a wave crashing on the rocks. I had known it was coming, but I hadn't expected it to feel this real. This wasn't just about a visit or a temporary arrangement. This was Toby telling me that he wanted to make this new life, this new chapter, his home. I crouched down to meet his eyes. "You're sure about this, Toby? It's a big decision, and your mom—" "I know," he interrupted softly, "but I'm sure. I don't like how things are at her place. And here, with you and Martha, it feels right. It feels like home." I exhaled, the weight of the decision settling over me. I knew it wouldn't be easy to navigate this with Helen, but I couldn't ignore what Toby was saying. He was choosing to make a life with me, to build something new where he felt safe. How could I deny him that? "I think we need to talk to your mom," I said gently. "But we'll figure it out. I promise you that." Later that week, I met with Helen to discuss Toby's decision. I had no illusions about how she would take it. This was no small matter, and I knew it would stir up old resentments. But I also knew that this was about Toby's future, his well-being, and that needed to come first. Helen listened, her arms folded across her chest, her expression tight. "You can't be serious, Nathan. Toby belongs with me. I'm his mother." "I'm not trying to take him away from you, Helen," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But Toby needs stability, and he's asking to live with me. He's told me he feels more at home here." Helen's jaw clenched, but she didn't argue right away. Instead, she looked away, as though considering her words carefully. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice low. "I'm his mother, Nathan. I've always been. I don't want to lose him." "I'm not asking you to lose him," I replied gently. "This isn't about taking him away from you. It's about what's best for him. And right now, Toby believes this is what's best." She was silent for a moment, her eyes shifting between me and the ground. Finally, she let out a long breath. "I don't like it," she said, her voice cracking. "But I'll let him stay with you. We'll figure out a shared custody arrangement. Just don't make this harder than it needs to be." I nodded, relieved. It wouldn't be easy, but at least we were finding a way forward. For Toby's sake, we had to make it work. That night, as Toby settled into his room, I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him get comfortable in a space that was now truly his. It wasn't much, a small room with simple furniture, but it was his. And for the first time since Miriam passed, I felt like I was building something that truly belonged to us. Martha came up behind me, and we stood there in silence, both of us taking in the same sense of quiet contentment. "This is it, isn't it?" she said softly, her voice filled with the kind of understanding only an old friend could have. "It is," I said, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "This is it." In that moment, I realized that what I had spent so many years searching for wasn't in the past. It was right here, in this new home, with Toby and Martha, as we created something lasting. A home built on love, trust, and the quiet moments that made life worth living. I was finally at peace.